Thanks, everybody. It's good to be here. As we've been talking about, there is a lot going on in the world. There is a lot of uncertainty in the economy, tariffs. I can say that as an American, I think. AI, whose jobs will it replace? How will it change the teams? And many companies, and I think many people, seem to be kind of holding their breath, waiting to see what's going to happen. And I honestly think that's exactly the wrong thing to do. It's understandable, but I think we need to take action. And I think we need to make impact. And I think we need to not anticipate the future. I think we need to make the future happen. Now, there really is a lot of uncertainty, though. I was at a conference just last week, the Business of Software conference, one of my favorite ones in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Gia, one of the presenters, did a survey of hundreds of people in many different companies that she works with, and she asked, what are your biggest obstacles right now? What are your biggest challenges? And obviously, overwhelmed with lots of execution was at the top of the list here. But surprisingly, the thing that was even more worrisome was team alignment, or lack of team alignment. And she dug into it, did a bunch of interviews like you do, a good product person does, of the people who said lack of team alignment was a problem. And here was one of the typical quotes, basically saying, nobody knows what the strategy is. Nobody knows what the product strategy is. Nobody knows what the company strategy is. Nobody knows what's going on at all. I'm going to talk today about the unique role that product plays in providing that context, in making it clear, not just to the engineers and the designers, but to the entire organization. You just heard the person before me say, why don't you bring finance onto your team? Why don't you bring marketing onto your team? Why don't you bring sales onto your team? That's exactly right. That cross-functional leadership role is unique to the top executive, sure, but also to product. So let's talk about how that works a little bit. We all know that there is meant to be a three-bubble diagram, right, of product success: desirable, feasible, viable. I'm going to recast this a little bit, not so much as an overlapping set of spheres, but instead as a machine. We all are in charge of designing and building the machine that is a business, that requires all of these gears to mesh properly in order to build a flywheel, really. But lots of organizations, their flywheel is not working so well. Lots of organizations that I work with are trying to optimize the machine, but what's really going on is there's misalignment across functions. Everybody's kind of working disconnected on their own departmental metrics, which, if optimized individually, in theory should add up to success, but in fact they clash as often as not. And the CEO or somebody often ends up playing referee to all the escalations of different clashing numbers. And the result of that is that growth stalls. It seems like it should go on forever, but it just doesn't. And every win seems to come at a greater and greater price, and with greater and greater effort. We're all working harder, and the flywheel is getting slower instead of faster. Let me give you an example. I worked with this one company, and their growth was flat and maybe slightly declining because they had unhappy customers and they had churn going on. So they were bringing on new customers, but they were losing them maybe even slightly faster than they were bringing them on. The CEO was in the weeds with every single department, dictating projects that each department would do. And he even said at one point, when I asked, do you have any cross-departmental discussions, planning, coordination, alignment? He said, no, we don't have time for that. They just need to execute, was his feeling. Quarter after quarter, they would launch new capabilities, and quarter after quarter, launch after launch, the launches would flop in the market. They would make no meaningful difference to existing customers in terms of retention or to bringing on new customers. And so there was a lot of finger pointing across the organization, And a lot of it was pointed at the product org. The CEO's complaint was they take forever to ship anything. It seems like no matter how small, it takes a whole quarter. And when we ship it, nothing happens. There's no result. Now, I looked into it, and the CEO suspected that the product team was crap. And really, I think, he didn't say these words, but he kind of hired me to prove that the CPO should be fired. That was, I think, what he hired me to do. Well, I did find one particular problem with the CPO. His team was doing a great job with customer research, understanding the customer's problem, the customer's journey, their workflows, and what problems they had, and what kind of solutions would be useful. And then he would unveil his plan for the quarter to the rest of the executive team right at the beginning of the quarter and say, this is what we're doing. Here's the roadmap. And they would say, well, I don't get it. This is all news to us. And the CEO would be like, I don't like any of that. Just do these other things. Here's the things sales asked for. Here's the things customer support asked for. Just do them. And the product team was left saying, well, what about all this research that we did? And they were like, we haven't seen this research before. So the fault of the product team was not that they weren't doing their job as product managers or UX researchers. They were doing the job, but they were not leading. They were not leading the organization. They were not connecting the dots for anyone outside product, UX, and engineering. They weren't bringing finance and customer support and sales and marketing along on the journey throughout all this discovery and validation process that they were doing pretty well. And so unveiling it all at the last minute was not working. Now, that company, things did not go well. The CEO ended up getting replaced. I learned that the board had replaced the CEO on the same day that I learned that the head of product had resigned in frustration. I talked to the new CEO, convinced him that if he could help this leader connect the dots with the other departments, it was really going to work, and he convinced him to stay, and he's still there. The company is in a much better place now because between the CEO and the CPO, they connected the dots. They unlocked the potential of all that great work that the team was doing. Now, let me give you a better story. I also am familiar with a company that is #1 in their space and has been for a decade. They are a $10 billion plus company. They have 14,000 employees. They have 300 million paid subscribers. And even after 10 years, their growth is accelerating and their retention is improving point by point, quarter by quarter. Who is this company? Anybody know? Netflix. Netflix is this company. Now, big B2C juggernaut, but a very down-to-earth former VP of product, Gibson Biddle, a friend who shares a lot what their journey was like at Netflix and takes credit for the things that are still going well at the company. The difference between these two product leaders is not product skill. It is connection. Gib is great at connecting the dots. He does it for all of us when he speaks, and he did it inside of Netflix. He was, much more so than his CEO, Reed Hastings, the owner of the company Flywheel, the connector of product and engineering and sales and marketing and finance. He was the one who articulated our formula for success and helped everybody judge what are we going to do against that formula. Gib's formula, well, I'll get into it in a little more detail in a minute. Actually, the point I wanted to make was this dot connecting thing that I'm saying sounds like it should be the CEO, right? Sounds like some other top executive should be doing this job. And yet they're not, usually. Very often, they're not. The CEO that got fired wasn't doing that. He was actually keeping the departments apart. I think the CPO's job is unique in connecting the dots. We can't ask engineering to do it. They have a mission. Their mission is build stuff, right? Marketing, create demand. Sales, make the quarterly numbers. Finance, provide the funding and so we can keep paying people. And the CEO, very often, like Reed Hastings, their job is to sell the vision. Their job is to work with the board, with the investors, with the analysts, with the big customers, and say, we are doing great things. Gib told me that Reed's deal with him was, you guys keep coming up with great stuff to do, and I will find the money. And so that was their partnership. Now you might say, okay, so not the CEO, what about a COO? Shouldn't they be doing the dot connecting? I don't think so. They're not there to craft the flywheel, they're there to run it. They're there to make sure it's greased properly, not that it's tweaked and designed and that the system comes together in a way that makes it go faster and faster over time. And you might ask also, well, what about a VP of product? Is that good enough? And I don't think titles really matter. I don't care whether it's head of or director of or C-level or whatever. In fact, I don't even care if the word product is in there. But what I want to get at is, what does somebody need to do to make the flywheel work? And a VP of product is usually perceived, as I'm going to define it, as somebody who is vertically oriented, like marketing, like engineering, on execution, on getting the trains to run. But where are the trains going? How do we decide which cities to connect with the trains? That's the CPO's job, to lead that effort cross-functionally. So there are 3 connections, I think, that the CPO needs to make within the organization. One is connecting customer value and business value. That is, if we do this, solve this customer's problem, it will help us make money. Either we'll grow, or we'll acquire new logos, or we'll retain customers, or we'll maintain margin. Whatever our business objectives are, I need to connect the dots between solving the problem for the customer and solving the problem for the company. Also, their job, as we've just been hearing, is to craft a strategy that connects vision to tactics. If the CEO or the founder is the original vision holder, the CPO needs to adopt that vision and craft a strategy for achieving it that informs all the tactics across the entire organization. And they need to connect the C-suite with each other on what we're doing, and critically, of course, with their own function, with product, with the cross-functional product team that is executing. So I'm going to give you examples of each one of these. And I'm going to start with the first one. Customer value, connecting it to business value. And here's Gib. Gib has this framework, this mantra that he repeated often at Netflix, which was, everything we do should be, what's the phrase? Creating customer delight in difficult to imitate, margin-enhancing ways. Difficult to copy, margin-enhancing ways. That is, connecting, delighting the customer with our business results, margin-enhancing ways. He, every time they worked together on quarterly planning, on road mapping, on strategy, he trotted out this phrase and said, everything we're going to do needs to serve these 2 masters, the customer and the business, and we need to tie them together. Gib and I worked on this version of a Netflix roadmap in a blog that he put together. He asked me, what does an outcomes-based roadmap really look like? And what would it look like if Netflix had one? And you can see from this that actually has real items on it from the Netflix 2022 roadmap, a series of themes of customer problems to solve. I want to find content that I'd like to watch. I want unique content that I can't get anywhere else. And every one of these is designed to move a needle. It's a product needle. It's usually engagement. It's basically about how much do you watch, because they figured out that the more you watch Netflix, the more likely you are to renew, and that retention is their #1 goal. Yeah, they like to grow, but they grow mostly by making sure you never, ever unsubscribe from Netflix, and that just means you're going to watch stuff. So they had a now, next, and not later, but consider roadmap that, that put things they were going to do together in the context of what the strategy was and what it would do for the business. He connected the dots. That's the job. When I was a practicing product manager and much younger and had more hair, I feel like I did that job too. I worked for this one company called Netflix. We sold data. And we pulled data in from many sources, some of which were not great quality or highly recent. And we had a very detailed, sophisticated way of testing, validating, and comparing that data to get the net high quality, highly reliable data out of the slush pile, essentially, that we collected from many different sources. It was a highly performant machine and highly accurate. We ended up creating one of the largest B2B marketing databases in the world, and we had a trading system that allowed you to get data out of it for free if you were a participant. Many of our customers came to us and said, wow, I wish our data was half as accurate as yours. And that was the spark of an idea. We said, well, could we clean your data for you? And they said, well, we would love that. We would pay anything for that. OK. Customer pain, business opportunity. So we made a sister product, which was our data enhancement service. That was my job, to find ways to use our IP to solve customers' problems in a way that made us money. Similarly, I worked at another point in time for Dun & Bradstreet, startup that I was part of, got acquired by them. And they asked me as a product guy, would I look at what enhancements we could make to our library product? Dun & Bradstreet sells an information product where you can look up all the information about businesses to libraries all over the world. And the product was getting kind of old. The UI was clunky, it didn't look modern, and the sales team was a little embarrassed by it compared to the competition. And they asked me, couldn't we re-platform and make it more modern and lovely and quick and so on, and more appealing, because we are not making our numbers, and we would like to make our numbers. So I looked at it, and I interviewed a bunch of librarian customers, and they all said, Bruce, your timing is terrible. Our budgets have all been cut, and we are struggling to maintain our subscription at all. And so you giving us a newer, prettier, faster, easier product is actually probably not going to change the numbers at all. And no, we are committed to buying your product and your competitor's product, so you can't grab market share from the competitor either. So there was a customer problem to be solved, but no business opportunity. And the sales team was very disappointed, but I said no, because you've got to look for where the gears mesh. Solving for one or the other doesn't really help. So let's talk about the connection between vision and tactics, where strategy plays, where our job really, it would seem, has the highest leverage. And I want to talk about one of my favorite authors. Has anybody read Tony Fadell's book, Build? Yeah, a few people. Fantastic book, highly recommended. Tony was the founder of Nest, the thermostat company that was acquired by Google. But before that, little known, he was a product manager at Apple. He was the first product manager for the iPod and also for the first 3 iterations, the iPhone. And one of the really interesting things about that journey was that it was so iterative. Take a look at this. This is the only AI-generated image in my slide. They started with an iPod, and they ended with the iPhone. And the iPad, and so many other popular devices. They had a vision, I think, from the beginning of doing something magical like the iPhone. In fact, Tony was an alum of a company called General Magic that basically sketched out the iPhone in like 1989. They wanted a bar-shaped phone with a touch screen and a bunch of apps that you could hold in your hand and connect to the world wirelessly. But it was technically impossible back then. And General Magic just died because they overpromised and completely underdelivered. And Tony went back to the drawing board and said, I need to find something that is on the path to that future vision, but can be successful with the technology and the price points of today. And that was the original iPod with a black and white screen and physical controls and tiny amount of memory and only one application, music. But they gradually added more applications. They gradually gave it a touch screen. They gradually gave it more capacity. They went color. They gave it Wi-Fi. Once they put a cellular modem in it, the step from commercially viable music player to commercially viable smartphone was easy. He needed to solve for both awesome and makes us money at every stage. And couldn't get there in one step. I think this is a model for how to think about being not just someone who can create something amazing, but something successful at the same time. A similar example in a completely different space. I worked with this company, Quantexa, and Imam was this was a little weird, one of their 3 CPOs. But it was clear that he was kind of in charge. He was the alpha dog in the group. They created this data platform for high-end financial institutions that gave them a lot of visibility and analytics that were difficult to get any other way. They had a bunch of PhDs on staff, and they were highly successful in that narrow niche. And they saw the opportunity to spread what they had created to many other adjacencies, to smaller banks, to different kinds of financial institutions like investment banks or like insurance companies. They saw that their infrastructure could go in many different directions. There was also geographic expansion. They were mostly in the UK, but what about America? What about Asia? And they had an embarrassment of choice. These 3 CPOs and the CEO and the head of sales, they all disagreed on which were the priorities. So we sat down and we did kind of a strategic map of these opportunities, and we compared them. We compared them in terms of how attractive we could make a lot of money and how far away our organization and our current product are fit for that market today, or we'd need a little work or maybe a lot of work. And it turned out that there was a logical order in which to conquer these adjacencies. It was mostly about verticals because while their product could scale in many different directions, their sales team and their marketing team were equipped mostly for large financial institutions. So they decided to conquer those first. And today, they are moving down market, but only through partners. They're part of they've just got certified as an Azure partner, for example, Microsoft Azure. And today, their company is valued in multiple billions of dollars, because they've been really smart about making sure the gears mesh at every stage of growth. Matt Kaplan at LogMeIn, a Boston area company, they acquired a little company called LastPass. Anybody know that company? Yeah. LastPass had a free version at the time, but it was very, very limited. You hit a paywall really quickly with LastPass. And Matt and their team at LogMeIn had kind of pioneered freemium in this space. And they realized that casting a wider net was actually their success method with LogMeIn. So they wanted to do the same with LastPass, but it was hard to convince their stakeholders, there we go, that was a good idea. Basically had to say, trust us. But he managed to do the connecting, the dot connecting between the LogMeIn executives and the LastPass executives who were still at the company and convince everybody to experiment with them. They didn't remove entirely the paywall. They just moved it much further upstream so that you got a lot more functionality and you got addicted to LastPass. And so when you finally hit the wall, there was no way you were going back. This was a huge success for them. The third connection I want to talk about is connecting the C-suite and the product team. I'm going to highlight a current company that I work with called Clarivate, and my internal partner there named Jonathan Sheffy. Jonathan is the consummate connector. He is the VP, again, titles don't matter, VP of Strategy and Product Operations. And what I have watched him do as we have worked with his team of product people and general managers is connect the dots. He speaks to the president, Henry. He speaks to the general managers, Anne and Julianne. He speaks to the directors of product and the marketing people and the salespeople. And he gets people on board with the mission of moving to a more ownership model, to a more product operating model, not by forcing it on them, but by making it clear how it's good for the company and how when we all push in the same direction, it's much more effective. Let me talk about a story that is kind of the opposite. I work with this company where we started with OKRs, and they had 8 executives, each one of them in charge of a department, and their first cut at the OKRs was, surprise, they had 8 OKRs, 8 objectives, 1 for each department. And I said, no, that's not how it works. Good OKRs are not departmental, they are cross-departmental. They are the connections between the different departments so that we can work on common objectives. I said, I would be much happier if you just had 1 OKR to share across the whole executive team. But if you really want to go for a higher level of difficulty, how about 3? And they said, nope. We're a seasoned executive team. We know what we're doing. We can do 7. I was like, okay. You're going to learn the hard way. Well, lo and behold, they achieved something like 28% of the OKRs that quarter. And they came back to me and said, you should have told us that we could have only done 3 or 2 or 1. And I said, I think I did. And they said, yeah, but you should have really told us. Well, when they started grappling with shrinking down the number, and they did over time, the CPO identified a cross-functional problem that was an obstacle to getting their machine working properly and their OKRs achieved. The obstacle was they didn't agree on the ideal customer profile. They were churning a lot of customers. They had a lot of complaints. Many of their existing customers were not referenceable because they were unhappy. And he felt it was because they were overpromising. Their product was good for a smaller size customer that had less elaborate needs. And the bigger enterprise customers that they were selling to just had more needs that the product could not yet support. Yeah, those things were on the roadmap, but they weren't going to be ready in the next 3 months when those customers went live. So he said, look, I think we need to narrow the ICP, and let's acquire customers we can make really, really happy. They'll be referenceable. We will stop the churn. It'll be awesome. And the marketing guy said, no way. No way. I have figured out how to make my number, which is marketing qualified leads, with a wider funnel, and if you shrink it down, I can't make my number. No way. And the sales guy said the same thing. Well, those bigger deals they're more money, and I need to make my number, so no way. And the services guy said, the big customers, they buy my services team's time, so no way. But he was trying to put together a viable business where they were each trying to put together a viable department. And so he couldn't drive alignment because he didn't have the authority, if you will, and we all struggle with influence without authority, right? So what would you do? You would go to the CEO and say, look, this is what I'm seeing, and we need to drive alignment. And unfortunately, the CEO did not support him in that. And what happened? The board replaced the CEO. This is not the company I was telling you about before. I've seen this story multiple times now. So somebody's got to connect the dots. And it's got to be somebody who's looking at the business as a machine, which is often the product leader. And then they have to have executive support from the top. I'll give you one more example. My buddy Tim Bohur was working at a company some years ago called Adfina. And they were in an ad tech business. They sold analytics. I'm sorry, I'm running a little bit late. I will try to wrap up. They sold analytics to companies that bought AdWords from Google. And they had a lot of custom report requests. And their reporting team was getting overwhelmed. The queue was getting longer. Customers were getting angry. And some of them were beginning to churn. Now, Tim looked into it and discovered, A, we weren't charging for these custom reports at all. The sales team was just throwing them in as an extra or as a favor. B, there was a lot of commonality in the reports, but everyone was slightly different. So it felt like everything was custom, but he questioned whether it really needed to be. He worked with customer support, with the actual report writing team on the services team, with the sales team, figured out how to essentially productize that service and built it on a more sustainable, maintainable, extensible technical platform. And not only stopped the churn and got more reports out faster, but created a new revenue line for the company because they started charging for it. He said, though, that even though it was kind of a product win, the real win was changing the working relationship across the departments. That they now all saw that they were in this together, trying to create something to solve a customer problem in a way that made money for the company. That was the win for Tim, and I completely agree. So these are those connections again. Customer value to business value, vision to tactics, and the C-suite amongst each other and with the product team. This is my favorite quote on that from a friend who runs product at a company called Komodo in the United States. The CPO's unique role is to align the executive team on strategy and objectives. I just asked him out of the blue. We were having dinner, and I just said, I'm giving this talk on the role of the CPO. What's your take on it? And he just blurted this out. And I said, oh, really? Let me write this down. Because that was, I said, that's fantastic. That's exactly my thesis. That's the whole point. It's not give me a roadmap. It's not write me requirements. Yeah, you have to do that too. But it's connect the dots. It's let's agree on where the roadmap is leading us. The result of that, if you do it right, is that a CPO gives leverage beyond what we are often tasked to do, which is to drive execution. Also gives us alignment across the C-suite, confidence from the investors and the customers, and really reduces strategic risk for the board and for the CEO. Short of the CEO, I think it's the most, you do it right, I think it's the most strategic role. And we're not all CPOs in this room, and that's fine. The secret is that that role is for all product people. That connecting the dots role, that is our superpower, not writing JIRA tickets. Yeah, we have to do that, but it is about connecting the dots for everybody we work with every day. So here are my calls to action for you. 1, be that connector for your organization. Somebody says, I don't understand why we're doing this. Take a minute and explain the business context, the customer context, and how they fit together. Seek those connections. If you're not sure about the connection, don't just say, well, I'm just doing my job. Ask. Corner an executive in the hallway and say, can you help me connect the dots here? Sometimes you'll learn some interesting things about the direction of the company that then will inform every decision you make afterward. And tell everybody that you're doing this. Be explicit about it. Tell everybody why it's important. How are you going to design this API? Well, it depends on who the user is. And who is the user? Well, it depends on how our business works. All of this is connected. Tell them why. So my last slide. If this is interesting to you, if you'd like to talk about how you could be part of my product leadership community, it's called CPO Studio, or somebody you know or somebody who works for you could benefit from this. This will take you to a short information page where you can set up a few minutes to chat about it with me. That's all.